food center, and I have absolutely no idea. Luckily, my daughter lives in China. We were talking about this yesterday. And I would bring my kids home and buy them a house next door.
There we go.
Nice.
Money well spent.
I'm Barbara Green, I'm on the board with the Community Food Center. And what would I do with $1 million? I think I would help my kids first and get them settled.
Nice. Good. Money well spent.
I am Chris Barnes. I am with the MHMR Tarrant County, the Early Childhood Services Division, and with $1 million.
Billion.
Billion. Oh, I'd buy a bigger house on the beach.
Nice.
My name is Eddie Renz. I'm on the board here at Sir Denton. I would buy that lot up there that's got that house on it. I think it's on Morse. There's an empty house that's been abandoned for a long time, and turn it into an amazing coffee shop and breakfast taco place.
Oh.
Nice.
It's all donated for us at
Yes.
Hi, my name is Katia Batista and I am with Giving Grace. And if I had $1 million, I would build a huge, humongous homeless shelter.
Ah, very nice. Kat, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Kat. I'm with Sir Denton. If I had $1 billion, I would probably buy like a plot of land and have like a tiny farm.
Oh, that would be cool. Rachel?
Hi everyone. My name is Rachel Adetomo. I'm with Community Services Inc. We house here at Circuit. If I had $1 billion, oh gosh. Well, first I'll make sure that my family is debt free, and with the remaining proceeds, I would use it in the nonprofit realm. So probably towards alleviating poverty, under different social determinants of that. So I would use it in that realm. Somehow, some way, either doing a foundation or something. After being debt free. Yeah.
I'm Cheryl Aldrich. I'm on the board of Sir Denton. If I had $1 billion, I would probably give a portion of it to each of my children and save some for my grandchildren. But then I'd like to set up a foundation that would give back to them.
That's not sitting next to me.
Yeah.
I'm Jamie Taylor, Health Services in North Texas, and if I had $1 billion, I would do a lot of traveling.
Yes.
I'm Courtney Hymas. I'm with North Central Texas College. I would buy a bigger house because I have 3 kids, and my 3-year-old recently has asked if we could buy him his own room. We were just looking for a big boy bed, but he wants the whole room. So I would do that. And probably put some aside for my kids to have when they're older, and then I'm also hoping to maybe start my own business one day. So I'm probably using that as well.
Nice.
My name is Ty Sizemore. I'm a housing relief case manager with Giving Grace. If I had $1 million, or $1 billion, sorry, I would first start off making sure my family was all set. Then I would invest in a women's shelter for women and children, and then a program for those who are getting out of prison, helping them get back into society.
My name is Lorena. I'm with Health Services in North Texas. And if I had $1 billion, where do I spend yeah, aside from helping my family and church band, buy some land or something. Yeah. Nice million dollars.
Hi everyone, I'm Allison and I work for Sir Denton. With $1 billion, I would take care of my family. My mom has 11 siblings, and so it comes from a very large family. So that would take up a good chunk of that money. But then after that, I would donate it all to a mental health related nonprofit.
Hi, I'm Kelsey. I'm with Health Services in North Texas, and I would travel.
Yep.
See the world.
Terry Gisno with Health Service in North Texas, and probably set up a couple trusts for grandkids for school. Then what I'd like to do, we have a little family fund where my mom would set up some endowments to support some health centers so that you just don't have to worry about funding. I mean, just do that, and then just personal travel.
Awesome.
Okay, I will go to virtual. Terry, how about you?
Hi guys, I'm Terry Johnson. I'm with Health Services in North Texas. If I had $1 billion, man, I'd figure out how to get more kiddos out of foster care and into homes where they are loved.
That's amazing. All right, Sid. We have Sid. Here we go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes, I am Sid from Health Services of North Texas, and if I had $1 billion, I will probably do two things. On the first, I will make a lot of donations to Health Services of North Texas, so we can continue be serving to all our patients, and I will probably build a bigger house so I can bring my family from Puerto Rico to here,
Oh,
and they can stay with me.
Thank you. All right, Doreen, you're up.
Okay, I'm Doreen with Health Services in North Texas. If I had $1 billion, I would invest in affordable housing.
Oh, yeah. Juana. Oh, you're on mute.
She's talking, yeah.
There we go.
Okay, my name is Ana Garcia, and I work for Recovery Resource Council. We serve veterans and their families. I'm a NFT, and if I had $1 billion, I would find a way to make education accessible globally. That would be enough money.
Nice, thank you. I'm gonna call on Yotsna, and please let me know if I mispronounced your name. Her camera's turned off. Let's see. All right, Carla, we will move on to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Carla and I work with Serve Denton. If I had $1 billion, I'd buy my parents a home. And then I would move to New York City and I don't know, figure it out from there.
And Patty, how about you?
I am Patty Hustis. I am with CASA of Denton County, and if I had $1 billion, I would probably buy a private jet and hire a pilot and fly just to be able to go wherever I want, whenever I want, and also help people get to wherever they need to go to serve people in other areas of the United States or elsewhere.
Nice, thank you. Did I miss anybody on Zoom? Oh, so Yotsna says her mic wouldn't unmute. So first, tell me if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. She says good morning. And Yotsna, what agency are you with?
That's Dr. Joe. She is with Health Services in North Texas.
That's Dr. Joe.
Yeah.
What would she do with $1 million?
Yeah, she's a pediatrician, so I'm sure she would do quite a bit of work to help the children.
Got it. Okay. Well, Dr. Joe is amazing. If you guys have ever had a chance to meet her, I got to meet her recently while we were at HSNT in Wiley filming, and she's a wonderful practitioner. Okay, Yolanda, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, I want to answer the question too. So if I had $1 billion, I would probably buy a private island with a private pilot and then donate most of it anonymously to different charities.
Nice.
Well, thank you. Let me just get this off the screen real quick. Thank you for allowing me to be here today to talk to you about unconscious bias. As Nora mentioned, I work with Dr. Gregory. Actually, he's my boss. So he made me come today. No, he really didn't. He offered this opportunity and I jumped at it. So I'm definitely glad to be here to talk to you all today. I do want to cover some meeting agreements and norms that I like to do with all of my sessions. I call it the 3 C's, which is confidentiality, communication, and commitment. And by confidentiality, I mean if we share any stories, let's just remain in this session and nothing goes outside of here. In terms of communication, make sure that we are just open and honest and we can share ideas and experiences. Oops, I got it. Okay, no problem. And then commitment is the third C, which is just being committed to being fully present, engaged, and interactive in the session. And I am going to use notes, so as many times as I do this, I still need to refer back to my notes. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Let's see. So we're going to talk about unconscious bias. To be successful in our organizations, we all must become more culturally competent in what we do, right? And so how do we do that? We do that by self-awareness and also by education. So that's what we're doing today. We want to be able to understand and interact with a different variety of people from different backgrounds, from different experiences, from different cultures that are different from our own. And adapting to these culturally diverse situations requires us to get this education so that we can communicate better, so that we can solve problems, so that we can resolve conflict, this little thing is,
Sorry.
and make informed decisions. So today we're going to talk about unconscious bias. And what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a little test. So what I want you to do with this is most of us believe that the information that we receive doesn't have an impact on our decisions. But when it comes down to it, does it really? So I'm going to take this, I want you to take this test. And what I want you to do is look at the video and listen to the instructions. And she's going to ask you to do something. I want you to verbally do so out loud. Okay? So got it?
Mm-hmm. A simple test that's been making fools of us since the 1930s. Can you read it? You'll see words printed in different colors. Just name the color of each word you see as fast as you can. Don't read the word, just name the color of the letters. For example, yellow, blue, green, red. Got it? Try it for yourself. Ready? Go.
Yellow, green, blue, red.
Green, blue, red, yellow, blue, red, yellow, green. Pretty easy, right? Now that you know what you're doing, try it again with one small change. Remember, the ink color, not the word. Ready?
Color, not the word.
Green, blue, red, yellow, red, yellow, blue, green, green, blue, red, yellow.
You are good.
So that, the second part of it was just a little different, right? You had to think about it, right? So when we're doing this exercise, this demonstrates that we are making connections below our subconscious level. And sometimes we don't even know we're making these connections. When this connection is broken, it takes us a little time, right, to think about it, right? You had to think about the second part of that and focus on the color or the word and not the color, right? Yeah, so colors are one thing, but we also have what we call this unconscious or implicit bias in our decision-making process. So we're going to talk about biases in decision-making. Okay, so unconscious bias is a preference or a prejudice for or against something. And not all biases are bad. Can anybody think of a situation where a bias would not be bad?
When you see someone with a gun?
When you see someone with a gun? That's a good one. But think about it. When we have a preference for our families, right? Over certain things. For maybe our favorite sports teams or the colleges that we went to, right? So not all biases are bad, right? Implicit or unconscious bias happens mostly without us even knowing it. Experts say that 90% of the information that we receive on a daily basis is unconscious bias. It's these mental shortcuts that our brains are just wired to make. When we see certain things, hear certain things, we have certain experiences. Our history, our experiences, our stereotypes, and our generalizations are the filters from which information flows. If I told you that my family, for Thanksgiving makes stuffing. You may say, well, my family makes dressing, right? If I say peanut butter, you naturally will say jelly, right? That's just unconscious thinking there. That's an example. We make these assumptions sometimes, but sometimes they could be incorrect, and sometimes they cannot be aligned with what our conscious mind is thinking. This can cause us to react, act, and behave in ways that could be detrimental and have unintentional consequences for both ourselves and for others. So let's do a second quick exercise. In front of you, you have a piece of paper. On the piece of paper, it's called a circle of trust. And what I want you to do, we're not gonna do all 10, but look at the numbers 1 through 5. And what I want you to do here is think about 5 people that you absolutely trust the most. And I'm not gonna define what trust is for you, and you're not gonna share the list with anybody, but just think about 5 people that you absolutely trust the most. And if you can, take family members out of it. If you can. Now, you don't have to, but if you can, try to leave family members out of it. And I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. Just do 5. If it's too hard, you can put family members on there. Is it hard for you?
I already did it.
Good. Okay. Give you about 1 more minute. All right, so what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna ask you to check the box as I call out different dimensions of diversity. So for example, the first box is gender. Looking at your list, look at who on the list has the same gender or similar gender as you. So the first box is the G is for gender. So just tick or cross the box that person is similar to you. Okay, so the second dimension of diversity is racial ethnicity. So if the person 1 through 5 is similar to you in race or ethnicity, check those boxes. The third box, yes.
Okay, my bias, there's a difference between race and ethnicity. So I find on here, I've got some people that are maybe similar race, but not the same ethnicity.
Okay, yeah, just however you define it, if you want to do either or. The third box is age, similar in age. The fourth box is sexual orientation. The fifth box is professional background. And the last box is religion.
Would you say the last box?
Religion. All right, so looking at your list, what is there anything you notice? Anything at all?
A lot of similarity.
Sexual orientation.
A lot of similarity.
A lot of similarities. Everybody agree with that?
I didn't have a lot of similarity.
You don't? Good for you. Anything else you notice? Any trends?
I didn't have anyone for age.
Didn't have anyone for age.
Yeah.
So people you trust, were they either younger or older than you? Okay. Mentors maybe, kind of. Yeah. So with this exercise, typically what we do see is people that are very similar to us or the people that we trust the most. These are also people that we tend to reward the most, give projects to the most, because they're similar to us. And what we call this is affinity bias, similar to us, or similarity bias, if you may have heard of that. So thinking about that, what are some implications of similarity or affinity bias when you're working with other people? What could be some implications of that when everybody's similar?
You don't get varying perspectives.
Right. Don't get varying perspectives. What else?
You might make a lot of assumptions.
Make a lot of assumptions. Yep. What else?
Your projects start to look the same.
Projects start to have maybe groupthink, right? Yeah. Any other thoughts?
You promote the people that you like, whether or not they're more
Yes.
qualified or not.
Right. You tend to forget if they have the skills or qualifications, but because you like them, maybe you'll promote them or reward them in some sense. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? That's exactly it. You know, as you have your circle of trust, the closer people are to you, the more similar they are to you. So this exercise was meant to demonstrate that for you. And let's talk about the different types of decision-making biases that we come across. As we just discussed, affinity bias is one, and this is a bias that mostly crops up with people decisions. This is what we discovered in this previous exercise. It occurs because we're motivated to see people that are similar to us in a similar fashion, in a favorable light. And we create what we call these in-groups and out-groups. And the in-groups are the people that we tend to go to the most, the people that we rely on. And the out-groups are people that we don't see in a favorable light, not as well, because they're not in our circle and they're not similar to us. And to mitigate this similarity bias, you have to actively find common ground with people who are different than you. That's how you mitigate this bias. The second type of bias is called experience bias. Anybody, any thoughts of what that might mean? Your profession? Close.
For instance, if the person had the same experiences that you had,
right,
you will assume that they are in the same train of thought as you.
Yeah.
So you will prefer them.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. It's experience bias is when we tend to believe that our perceptions are accurate and that everyone perceives the world the same way that we do. And so we tend to we call these the go-to people because we have experience with them because we think they think like we do, right? And to mitigate this type of bias, what we do in this situation is we seek multiple perspectives. So actively imagining another point of view from a different perspective. And then you also could build in a process to obtain other information. So bring in other information that you can consider before making that decision. Okay, thank you for that. Did somebody have something online? Okay. And the third one is called distance bias. Has anybody ever heard of this one? Any thoughts of what this one might entail? Yeah, exactly. You go to people who are close to you. So maybe you work in the same office with these people, or it could be that you ignore people who are on Zoom because they don't have their cameras on. And that happens, right? Does that happen in meetings where you forget about the people who don't have their cameras on, right? It also could mean distance in terms of when a project is gonna finish. So when you think about long-term benefits of a project, you tend to, like, oh, I wish this could end earlier. And you don't think about the short-term benefits of a project. And so to mitigate this bias, what do you think you do with this situation? How do you overcome this bias?
Investing yourself to expand farther than your close proximity.
Yeah, it's easy. It's just take distance out of the equation. So if you have somebody that's online or on camera, have collaboration moments where you can incorporate their feedback. It's simple. Just take distance out of it. Don't look at them as, like for instance, I work from home and my corporate headquarters is in Madison, Wisconsin. So a lot of times I'm on Zoom like all day long. So, sometimes when they do things, I'm not there to do it, or I don't get picked because I'm not in the office, but I can still do the work, right? So if they take distance out of the equation, then that's how you mitigate this type of bias. Okay, any thoughts or questions on any of these three? Okay, so now we're gonna talk about selection bias. I'm gonna watch a short video first. Okay, here we go. Are we back? Good.
My name's Jose Zamora, and I had to drop a letter to get retired. Every morning I wake up on Craigslist and apply to as many jobs, every job that I feel qualified for. About 50 to 100 a day for months. No phone calls, no emails, nothing. One day I just thought, what if I try Joe? Just remove the S in my name and maybe I can make some dollars. The Monday I decided to go from Jose to Joe. 7 days later, the next Monday, that's when all the responses started coming. That's when all the replies and emails. The position is open, that we want to meet with you. Call us back. I was applying for the same exact job, the exact same resume, the exact same experience, just a different name. Sometimes I don't even think people know or conscious or aware that they're judging, even if it's by name, but I think we all do it all the time.
All right. So who got the job?
Joe.
Joe, probably, yeah. Doesn't really say, but you could definitely see the difference between who reached back out to him and who replied to his interviews, right? Because he removed the S from his name. So we're gonna talk about three more selection biases. The first being the anchor bias. This is when we overly rely on the first piece of information that we receive as an anchor to base our decisions on. So, for example, the first thing that you find out about a candidate is that they were unemployed for over a year, and you focus on that rather than the solid qualifications that that candidate may have had for the position. So one way to avoid this type of bias is instead of relying on that one piece of information, right, what do? Look at the whole picture, right? Consider their whole history. And this could be in any type of selection process, not just in the interviewing process. So when you're talking to candidates or talking to applicants, then don't overly rely on just that one piece of information to make your decision.
Or I wonder how much, like for those of you that are directly serving members of the community, how much like maybe the first piece of information a client tells us about themselves leads us to make assumptions about what the rest of them must be like? I don't know, I don't work directly with members of the community, so I'm kind of curious about what that's like for you guys.
I think when you interact with the clients over the phone, you get a feel of their personality and what words they used, kind of get a feel of their education, if they're in trauma or that kind. I work with people that are at risk of becoming homeless. So when we are looking at a client, at least for me, I try to get a grasp of the person and not just assume by what they're emailing us or what, I also want to engage with them that way.
So you ask like additional questions to kind of get the full picture. Yep. Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts there?
I would say sometimes for us, we get children that come through CPS, and so that referral often looks like it's a CPS baby. And not necessarily that that's a negative thing, cause that helps us actually to start thinking trauma, and then, you know, like,
what services?
yeah, who's gonna be appropriate for that family based on that knowledge. I mean, it's biased, but not necessarily a negative.
Yeah, and not all biases are bad, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you have to know how to put them into a category to offer the services that's needed for that person's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I would say in some cases, not me personally, but I have witnessed that first, where the exact example that you gave about being unemployed. Sometimes we get calls in and they say, oh, I've been unemployed for the last 2 years now. And when you hear that, it's like, oh, well, they don't really want a job. When you just ask, you know, go further to see what happened, they could have needed supportive employment, you know, vocational rehab, or, you know, something along those lines. But I have witnessed some people get passed over because of
that initial
bias. And I'm just like, you know, let's take the time to get to know.
And asking questions is a great way to understand the full story and get that extra information that you may not be aware of from your initial impression, right? Yeah. All right, thank you. Okay, so the second one is called status quo bias. It's our preference for the way things are. We want things to remain the same, which can also result in a resistance to change. So, for example, status quo takes less effort, right? It's just, this is how we've always do it, so why change it? Sometimes when a company is repeatedly engaging in the same type of hiring practices, then they're not gonna get that innovation, right? They're not gonna get that diversity of thought. So if you continue to go back to the same hiring pools, then you're gonna get the same results, right? So one way to mitigate this bias is to celebrate creativity, celebrate innovation, you know, thinking outside of the box, inviting other differences and opinions in, and also continuing to push the status quo, right? Any questions here? Any examples, any thoughts around the status quo bias? Have you come across this in your work?
I used to work with a nonprofit that provided alcohol recovery services to women. And they were housed in a primarily white neighborhood, and I think they advertised in primarily white spaces, and so all the women were white for the most part. And so they've been actively trying to increase their diversity over the last couple of years, and so it meant like
thinking outside the box,
going to other, you know, trying to be more present in other spaces. And I think they've even been looking at like, they even moved their neighborhood. They switched neighborhoods to be in a more diverse neighborhood, so they did a capital campaign and physically moved the whole. Well, they didn't move they moved the organization into a new building, but yeah, I thought that was really interesting that it took a really concerted effort for them to decide to be in different spaces to recruit more people. Yeah, to serve more people.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Any other thoughts or questions? Yes?
Yes, I remember personally, I was hired, this was in my Dominican Republic. I had gone in the 1990s, and there was this big post on the paper, and I said, oh my God, I wish I could get that job. They were looking for a bilingual secretary. So my dad said, you know what, get ready, and tomorrow we'll go, and of course I did. And I was hired just because the person that interviewed me, I don't think I was the most skilled, but because she liked me and we had so much in common, because her background was so similar to mine, that I was hired on the spot. And I never thought that I would get hired because of all the qualifications they were looking for, that I didn't think at that time I had them. But that was something that always stood in my mind.
Thanks for sharing that story. That actually goes right into the halo effect, which is the next one. And the halo effect bias is when we develop an overall positive impression of someone because of their qualities or traits. So they may not, you know, like you said, in this case, may not be the most qualified, but because there's something you like, it's called the love at first sight effect. That's what it is. you instantly click with someone, and so you forget, you know, all the other qualifications, because you could have just as well, you know, not been a good hire, not had the skill set, and I'm glad it worked out for you. But that's a great example of what we call this halo effect. And one way to mitigate the halo effect bias is to try out different types of strategies. So in the interview process, set up several rounds with different people so that it's not just your opinion. So if you have a position in your organization that comes open, instead of it just being you, maybe your leader can also do intake or take an interview with a person, or invite someone else from a different department that has nothing to do with your department, and that way you have a third party opinion. And so that you're not, you know, you don't have this love at first sight when you meet the person that you really like or somebody that's similar to you. So that's another way. Yes?
Wouldn't the halo effect in essence also work the opposite way? If there was something that was a negative and then you generalize that to the
Yes,
population?
absolutely.
It's still a halo effect.
Well, we actually call that a horn effect. It's the opposite. So halo is the good and horn is the bad.
The idea of generalization.
Yes, absolutely. And go ahead.
I was gonna say, I interviewed somebody via Zoom, and this is telling myself he had a beard, and then I invited him to come in, and he shaved his beard, and his clothes were mismatched, and I was like, my perception of him totally changed. And I was like, there was a lot of other stuff that was wrong with him as well in person, but online, he interviewed totally different and presented totally different than he did when he came in person.
So what did you do in that case? Did you still interview him?
Somebody else was way more qualified than he was, and she's now my employee. So I hired her, but I literally was asking my boss if I could hire two people because I thought he was going to be a really good fit as well. And then when he came in person, there was a lot of other things too, but that was one of them. I was like, oh, now you don't seem the same, like the same person.
That has happened to me, honestly. I had a position open, and it was a referral too, so which was even better because I was like, oh, this person has worked with them. So they came in, they interviewed, and it was great. I loved them. And they showed up for work, their hair was purple, they had earrings and places that I was like, whoa, where did this person come from? But, you know, I'm glad I hired her because I hired her on her qualifications, not on, you know, her external and how she looked. But it was just like a total different from night and day. I was like, who is this
So I guess
person?
you would have had to work harder if she had that on during the interview, you would have had to work
I
harder
probably would have
to
had
get
a bias against it. I probably would have held that against her and thinking, you know, that's not professional. But she was very professional and she was very good at her job. But that is the thing. We all have biases. There's not a person on this earth that doesn't have a bias. So I like to lead with not all biases are bad because they're not all bad. I mean, these, as I mentioned in the slide, this is our experiences, right? This is how we grew up. This is what we know, and everybody's different. So we have different filters. We have information coming from us from everywhere. And the way our background, our cultures, our experiences, that all puts impressions on our unconscious bias and our reactions to things. So it's not negative. I know bias sounds like a negative word, but it's not a negative word. And so what I want to do next is talk about how do we mitigate these biases. So when we're aware of our unconscious biases, what's a strategy that we can use to mitigate these biases and limit them? So what I want to do is introduce to you what I call the pause strategy. And it's exactly what it sounds like, pause. So for that, the P is, I can't even see my own slide. The pause is pay attention. So pay attention to your reactions. You know, when you, like in my instance, when the person came in the interview, pay attention to your body language. Like, how are you reacting to people? Like, do you have a different, or this visual change in your demeanor when somebody comes in that you're talking to? Pay attention to your reaction in your situation. And then what information is available? You know, think about it. What do I know about this person? Or what have I not considered about this person? Second is acknowledge your assumptions. So what assumptions am I making about this person? Acknowledge that we all have those biases, right? And those assumptions. And once you acknowledge that, then you've gone from the unconscious to the conscious, because now you're thinking about it. Kind of in that exercise we did with the colors, you go from that unconscious thinking to now it's a conscious thought. And then third, understand your perspective. So we talked about a few biases here in decision making and selection, but there's over like 150 biases that we could have covered today. Just tons of biases that we all have. But when you acknowledge those biases and understand that you have your own biases. The third being seek different perspectives. So what else am I missing? What am I leaving out? What didn't I consider? You know, how can I get feedback from others? So seek different perspectives. And then the last one is examine your options and then make your decision. So this pause strategy is very popular. There are other strategies as well, but this is one I wanted to introduce. Has kind of a catchy little acronym with it. But pause, take a minute, think about it. If it takes you a few seconds, a few minutes, or a few days, pause and think about the biases that you may be having that you're inserting into the situation. Okay, any questions on this or the strategy?
I guess I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I have been trying to pay more attention to lately is when I am planning either an event or having a meeting, trying to figure out what unconscious bias, or maybe I'm not using the right word, but like how I might be bringing unconscious bias into how I'm organizing and arranging that meeting and event, and how I may or may not be making it a safe or convenient space for other people who are different from me. But there's no one, I mean, I guess I'd have to use go against my distance bias, and I'd have to start reaching out to people to say, this is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, to send it to someone else and get their opinion on it. First, I think it's understanding that we all have biases, right? And then if you can identify what those biases are, then you can choose a method to mitigate it. Mm-hmm. And so there are different ways that you can bring perspectives into the situation. And one of them is that, am I looking at this right? Maybe I need to run this by somebody else, maybe somebody who doesn't even understand it, and see what biases or what things am I missing in this. So that's definitely one of the ways that you can mitigate the thoughts and biases that may creep into what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, because the work on its own is, I'm all alone, right? I'm isolated, there's not a group, and so then I tend to just plow forward, and then maybe it's not, I don't put it, it doesn't end up being in a format that works, for other people.
Yeah, and another thing, we talked about groupthink a little bit. One of the exercises I did, I had a class yesterday, and he introduced what's called parallel processing. And how that works is, especially when you're in chat or Zoom, so what you do is you ask a question. So if you want to know, okay, tell me, the name of if you had $1 billion, what would you do if you had a company? Tell me the name of that company. So instead of having everybody just type it in chat, because a lot of times we wait and see what other people are gonna say first, right? Parallel processing says, okay, I want you to type it in chat, but don't hit send until I say hit send. And what that does is a couple of things. It allows you to, everybody to have an opinion that's not being judged, right? Because now you don't see it before everybody else does, and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna say this because I agree with them, or I'm gonna tag on to this. And so you just go 1, 2, 3, everybody hits send, and then you see all the responses. And you'll see what comes out of that is a lot of times you are similar in your response. But had I told you to do it and you guys just hit enter when you were done, I'm the type I do sometimes. I'll wait and see, okay, what did such and such say? Or if my leader is on the call, then I might, wait and see what they say and then follow up. So those are some ways that you can mitigate that and bring those different perspectives without putting people on the spot too.
Oh, great, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so any other questions or thoughts about the different types of biases that we talked about today? Any feedback or input? Okay, so I have a challenge for you. And the challenge is, when you go back to your organization, what are some conscious things that you can do over the next week or days to take what you learned today about unconscious bias or any of the biases that we discuss. What are some things that maybe you learned and you're like, okay, I'm gonna try that. Or now that I understand that better, I'll do something different. Is there anything? Anybody wanna share?
Well, my role is a little bit different since I don't work directly with members of the community, but I do work with our partner agencies. And so we collect data quarterly from our partners and then on an annual basis from our members. And so one of the things that I've been trying to think about recently is what kinds of biases or assumptions I might be making in our partner survey, like the way I decide what the answer choices are, the way I decide, I don't say when to give the survey, but how do I, why do I decide to make a certain link or to add a certain type of item? And so, and that applies to any kind of survey design, right? When I write questions, I write them based on vocabulary that I understand.
I was just saying language is another.
Yeah, questions that I know, but I would understand how to answer, and so I think that's an area where this would come in very, very handy for me is trying to apply this a whole lot more into my survey design. And actually I plan on pretty soon reaching out to our partner agencies because I don't know if you all remember, but I don't know if you guys are the people who fill it out, but there's a client characteristics section, and we have historically only asked about race, and we group race and ethnicity together, sex, only sex, not gender, and then age, and that's pretty much it. And so there's all of these other characteristics that are left out, and the categories may not work for our different agencies, and so I want to get more feedback from our partner agencies about the way they're collecting their data and the way they like to have their clients represented, so that Serve Denton's cumulative data can be more representative of our partners.
That's excellent, excellent, love it. Anybody else have any thoughts of how they could take this back?
I think the status quo bias and just trying to think of ways of, like, where do we do things because that's the way it's been done.
Always been done,
And
yeah.
where can we maybe be a little more innovative in changing some of that?
Yep, thank you.
I think that works for us as well, because we have a lot of difficulty with our volunteers. We all look the same. We are all the same. And our client base is very diverse. And I will go and stand in front of the clients and go, hey, we need volunteers. But they're looking at us and nobody looks like them. Maybe that's a bias too. I mean, it's all connected, but it's very hard to get them out of that chair onto this side of the giving out food. But they would understand, we would be so much richer of an organization, that's terrible English, if they would join us and help us help them. But we can't get through to that barrier. And we're very undiverse.
Why do you, is it, how do you advertise? And
We don't.
You don't?
We don't
Okay.
advertise, it's usually, my husband retired and we decided that we wanted to work with a food pantry. Volunteer 50 hours a week for a food pantry. So, but then, Barbara found out from her neighbor, we never go out into the community and look. And we don't go out and look for clients either, so it's pretty much word of mouth.
Okay.
We could use a marketing person. We really could, if anybody knows anybody who'd like to volunteer. We could really use marketing. Other than Eddie, he's busy.
Eddie. You're the go-to.
Yeah. So I know that's a
Bilingual.
Desperately.
I'm just curious, like, I wonder if when the clients that you help, when you talk to them, would they be willing to volunteer to be representative?
I actually will go out and I will work the cars. I will work the line. And I will walk up to a car anonymously. I don't wanna know who they are, and I will say, if you ever have time, I know they have 3 hours on Monday and Wednesday mornings to sit in their cars, so they could be coming in and handing out food.
In the stuffing, in the flyers that y'all put in the bag, is there ever information about volunteering?
Yes, there
Right, a
is.
response to it.
And we do it in Spanish and we do it in English, so we're trying, but so far, it's a wall.
Do
you think part of it might be like if they, have kids or like
Oh,
they're
yes.
working, it's just hard to get there, and they do have to wait for 3 hours for food and things, it's just
Oh,
some
no,
barriers.
I understand that there are positions, but there has to be someone in that line
Yeah.
who is my age, who is maybe not, we have a lot of grandparents raising their grandkids. I have done that, so I can appreciate that, but there's gotta be somebody in there who once a week can sort cans.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you should add, so if the majority of your volunteers are retirees, because those are the folks that have the most time, whether there are like community centers in more diverse neighborhoods where you could advertise so that there's, potentially other retirees, but, they are bilingual, but they're retired too, but they don't ever think, they don't need to come to the food center, so they don't know about it.
Maybe various churches.
Churches is what I was thinking too.
Well, the churches know about us on a receiving basis, but not on a giving basis, because, the church just hands out too, so they need volunteers, so they're not gonna say, oh yeah, we'll loan you this group, because they're probably in the same.
Or senior activity centers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would say apartment complex, if you go to their office and then leave a posting in Spanish and English. And the posting has to be very kind of like, this is great for you to do, and it's gonna help you, it's gonna help clear your, it's gonna be good for your mental health. All of those things come into play. Yeah.
Even
So that
connecting
would be a
with maybe
suggestion.
like the fraternities and sororities and
Same
stuff.
with you, like
A lot of community
Yeah.
services.
Yeah, they look
hours
for
per
staff.
Yes, they'll do that.
Schools.
They'll do that, and they'll say, oh, we have 28 people, and we wanna
On
come
one day.
tomorrow. Because they need community service hours. I'm sorry, this is
That's
gonna
okay.
end us
Hey,
all
it's
over.
fine. It's fine. All right, any other thoughts? All right, well.
I will say my last final thought would be on the distance bias. Even when Nora had the people on the Zoom call say the $1 billion thing, I would have totally forgotten about them.
Yeah.
And so, and then even when she said it, part of me was like, oh, they're not here. And I immediately had the bias of them as if their opinion didn't matter as much as those of us here in the room. Sorry, y'all.
That happens. Yeah, and I didn't call on anyone. But, and one way that we try to do it, when we're doing Zoom, because a lot of ours are Zoom, is we just have everyone speak. So that way you won't forget about anyone. So you can have everyone have a turn. And that way, you don't lose those people that are
I think that happens in
alive.
reverse too, cause last month I was on Zoom and it pops up with a name that nobody knows me by, and I didn't know I could change my name till recently. So, cause Nora did that, oh, people on Zoom, blah, 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 and it's like my coworker got her name called and then mine didn't get called, and I'm like, I guess I don't count.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
It happens, sorry.
And now you're like, this is why I'm
And then I found out there was food, and I was like,
Yeah, in person today, yeah. Well, the last thing we have here is a survey, so if you guys could fill that out. And then also, I will leave my contact information, so I have plenty of resources. If you want more information on this topic, I would definitely be willing to share that.
Thank you, Wanda. So yes, if you could take a few minutes to complete the survey, I will email it out as well, so if now's not good, I'll email you the link so that you can click on it and do it later.